In the United States, a person can usually be president for only 2 terms. Each term lasts for 4 years. So, most presidents can serve for a total of 8 years. This rule is a very important part of American government. It wasn't always a law, but it became one after a president served for much longer. Many people believe this limit is good for the country. It helps make sure that one person does not have too much power for too long. This idea goes back to the early days of the nation. Even before it was an official rule, the founders were wary of leaders who might act like kings. There is a small exception to this 2-term rule. Imagine a vice president becomes president because the current president can no longer serve. This could happen if the president dies or resigns. If this new president serves for less than 2 years of the previous president's term, something interesting happens. They can still run for 2 full terms of their own. This means in this special case a person could be president for a little bit longer than 8 years. It could be up to 10 years in total. This part of the rule makes sure that someone who steps in briefly isn't unfairly penalized. Before this rule was a law, there was a strong tradition. George Washington, the very first president, decided to step down after serving 2 terms. He could have tried to run for a 3rd term. Many people probably wanted him to, but he chose not to. He thought it was important for the country to have a peaceful change of leaders. He worried that if presidents stayed too long, America might start to look like the monarchies in Europe. His decision set an example that many other presidents followed for many years. This tradition, set by Washington, was very powerful. Most presidents after him respected this unwritten rule. They served 1 or 2 terms, and then stepped aside. They understood the importance of new leadership and fresh ideas. However, because it was not an official law, there was always a possibility that a president could try to serve longer. For over 150 years, the 2-term tradition held strong. But then, a major world event, and a very popular president, would lead to this tradition being broken, and eventually, to a change in the Constitution itself, making the limit a formal law. For a very long time in American history, there was no actual law saying a president could only serve 2 terms. The Constitution did not originally set a limit on how many times a president could be elected. As we saw, George Washington set a precedent, a kind of example, by choosing to serve only 2 terms. Most presidents after him followed this example. They saw it as a good way to ensure that power did not become too concentrated in one person. This tradition was a cornerstone of American political life, even though it was not written down in the nation's highest law. It was a gentleman's agreement. Then came Franklin D. Roosevelt, often called FDR. He became president in 1933. This was a very difficult time for the United States. The country was in the middle of the Great Depression. Millions of people had lost their jobs and homes. FDR promised a new deal to help the country recover. He was very popular. He was elected to a 2nd term in 1936. Then, as his 2nd term was ending, World War II began in Europe. Many Americans felt it was not the right time to change leaders, especially with such a major global conflict unfolding. So, in 1940, Franklin D. Roosevelt decided to run for a 3rd term. He won. This was the first time any president had served more than 2 terms. Then, in 1944, with World War II still raging, he ran for a 4th term, and he won again. President Roosevelt led the country through these incredibly challenging times. His leadership during the economic crisis and the global war was seen as vital by many. He served for a total of 12 years before he passed away in office in 1945, just as the war was ending. FDR's 4 elections were unique in American history. While many people supported him, his long time in office also raised concerns. Some people worried that having one person as president for so long was not good for democracy. They thought it gave one individual too much power. They also worried about the precedent it set for future presidents. Could another president try to stay in office for many years? These concerns began to grow, and people started to think seriously about whether there should be a legal limit on presidential terms to prevent this from happening again in the future. The concerns about a president serving for too long, especially after Franklin D. Roosevelt's 4 terms, led to a significant change. People remembered the tradition set by George Washington. They felt it was important to make this tradition an official part of the U.S. Constitution. The idea was to prevent any single president from accumulating too much power over an extended period. This was seen as a way to protect the democratic system and ensure regular, peaceful transitions of leadership. The memory of FDR's long presidency was fresh in everyone's mind when these discussions began to take serious shape. So, Congress decided to act. They proposed an amendment to the Constitution. This amendment was called the 22nd Amendment. Its main purpose was very clear: to limit the number of times a person could be elected president. The amendment states that no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. This made the old two-term tradition into a firm, unbreakable law. It was a direct response to FDR's long tenure and the desire to ensure no future president could follow that same path, regardless of their popularity or the circumstances facing the nation. The 22nd Amendment also addressed the situation where a vice president takes over. It says that if a person becomes president by taking over for someone else and serves more than 2 years of that term, then they can only be elected president one more time on their own. This means if they serve 2 years and 1 day of someone else's term, that counts as one of their elected terms. This provision was carefully crafted to close any potential loopholes. The goal was to ensure the spirit of the two-term limit was fully upheld in all practical scenarios that might arise. This amendment was passed by Congress on March 21, 1947. After Congress passes an amendment, it then needs to be approved or ratified by the states. 3/4 of the states must agree for an amendment to become part of the Constitution. This process took a few years. Finally, on February 27, 1951, the 22nd Amendment was ratified by the required number of states. From that day forward, the two-term limit for U.S. presidents became the law of the land. It fundamentally changed the landscape of presidential politics in the United States for all future generations. Changing a part of the U.S. Constitution, like the 22nd Amendment, is a very difficult process. It was designed to be hard so that the basic laws of the country are stable and not easily altered by temporary political moods. To change an amendment or to get rid of one, you have to go through the same amendment process that created it in the first place. This means there are 2 main steps. First, a new amendment has to be proposed. Second, it has to be ratified or approved. These steps require broad agreement across the country. To propose an amendment, there are 2 ways. One way is for 2/3 of both the House of Representatives and the Senate to vote in favor of it. This is the most common way amendments have been proposed. The other way is for 2/3 of the state legislatures to call for a national convention to propose amendments. Once an amendment is proposed, it must then be ratified. This requires 3/4 of the state legislatures to approve it, or for conventions in 3/4 of the states to approve it. This high bar means any change would need widespread support. So, for a president to be able to run for a 3rd term today, the 22nd Amendment would have to be repealed or canceled out. This would mean going through that whole difficult amendment process again. It would require a huge amount of political agreement across the entire United States. Given how and why the 22nd Amendment was put in place to prevent too much power in one person's hands, it is unlikely that there would be enough support to change it easily. Most people still believe in the reasons behind the term limit. The rule limiting presidents to 2 terms is very important for American democracy. It helps to ensure a regular change of leadership. This brings new ideas and different perspectives to the White House. It also reinforces the idea that the office of the president is more important than any single person who holds it. The peaceful transfer of power is a key feature of a healthy democracy. Term limits are seen as a safeguard against any one leader becoming too dominant, potentially like a king or a dictator, thereby protecting the balance of power carefully designed by the nation's founders.